Hello and welcome to BISNOMICS, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. I'm Dhananath Fernando. The budget of the government of Sri Lanka. What exactly went on there? There's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of details being shared, but as any ordinary businessman, a citizen would want to know the summary of things. What's going on in that and what is in it that is relevant for you, for your area of business. Today, here in BISNOMICS, we will be talking about just that. And joining us for this very special discussion is none other than Dhananath Fernando, an expert in the area of economics from the organization Advocata. Dhananath, welcome to BISNOMICS. Absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Dhananath. Thank you very much for having me.
Dhananath, now you are quite a sought after man because especially when the budget's out, everyone wants to know what does Dhananath think, and that's exactly today what we are going to deliver to our audiences. Dhananath, first up, the impact of this budget for the fiscal balances of the country. Your thoughts on that? Now, we've seen the numbers. You probably have a better idea on what's our expense, what's our revenue, and we all know that since the 1970s, we have hardly been having a budget surplus. So, overall, what's the impact on the government fiscal balances after this budget that has been presented?
Thank you, Dhananath, first of all, for having me. In the fiscal deficit this time, from the medium-term fiscal management policy, we were planning to keep it for about 8% for 2022, and it was about 11% in 2021. We are expecting about 11%, but even to cover that 8% would be challenging, but bringing it down from 11% to 8% has to be commended. But I think the missing link is how are we going to bridge that 8% is what is not very clearly pronounced in the budget. I think the finance minister expects to cover it as usual from borrowing, but now the challenge is borrowing is not easy as earlier, especially when we have to settle our debtors in USD terms. Correct. Because our credit ratings have been affected by Moody's and every main credit.
Safe to say we have been rated almost at a junk level.
Exactly. So it is not an easy thing to raise money from the markets. And on the other hand, then the other option available is if we were to raise money in dollar terms, then you have to go to bilateral loans. So that is you have to seek out to China, Japan, India, Middle East, basically your friends to lend us money. So that's the challenge. And also on the domestic front, I think now the interest rates are slightly moving upwards, and also with that we expect a little bit of tightening in the fiscal system. So that is the question mark, but I think bringing it down from 11% to 8% has to be commended. At the same time, it's not also an easy year because for the known COVID, but also I think also somewhat has to be our wrong decision making in the previous years. However, I think the people and the investors could have been in a much better situation if they knew how the revenue or how the deficit is going to be bridged. Correct. What is the strategy that we are going to adhere could have been pronounced well is my opinion.
Because Dhananath, when we talk about economics and even when we teach economics, I mean you talk about economics, I talk about economics, we always say that continuously trying to borrow and inject money into the economy is not a feature of a sustainable economy. Now, having said that, despite that, we as a country have been trying that strategy for many years, and I think now we are running out of space and steam for that strategy. Am I correct?
You are absolutely correct. So, Dhananath, the problem is that, so basically from even the finance minister has pronounced some of the revenue proposals. Even if he collects all the revenue, let's just visualize a scenario, he brings all the money into this table and there's a queue from one hand just to get the interest payment of the previous borrowings that we had.
Yeah.
And there's other ministry secretaries lined up for their respected allocation. So if we start distributing this money, 70% of this money of his expected revenue just will go for interest only, not the principal payments. So then even if you start doing the completely like the debt servicing, this money is not adequate, everything that he collected. So then he has all the state workers, their salaries, their capital expenditure, their recurrent expenditure, the defense budget, health, education, digitization, everything is there, still he has to cover. So however, the good thing is in this budget, for the incremental expenditure that he expects to incur, he has covered that from the incremental revenue generation. So there is a surplus there. So that is good. If it was not, even if he is not covering for his incremental expenditure, that could have been a very disastrous situation. So but that's there. But having said that, it is a difficult arithmetic calculation that the finance minister is trying to balance. He is expecting about a 46% increase in the revenue. His expenditure has gone up by about 16%, but our revenue base is very low. So I would recommend, my recommendation is, rather than trying to increase the revenue, that could be one strategy, but Tharindu, you can't really cut down the, you can't really increase the revenue without providing some signaling to cut down the expenditure.
Correct.
It is like, you run businesses, if you are trying to say, let's do a salary cut, if the CEO is not taking the salary cut, then it's very difficult to convince your workforce to get a salary cut. So I think the starting point has to be the expenditure, cutting down expenditure. There are some signaling, but I think the practicability, whether it's a 46% increase in revenue, whether it's possible, that practicability has to be re-evaluated in my view.
Some very, very valid opening thoughts there, Dhananath. Let's talk about the sectors that have been given a boost from this budget, because a lot of people want to know, because honestly, Dhananath, there is so much being said. I think a lot of people don't really bother to go into the detail, because we've seen budget after budget coming in, but by the end of the year, we feel that it's not what was mentioned in the budget. What's happening is sometimes things totally different, because the government can change those budget policies also later on. The question is, what are the sectors that have got a boost from this budget, the key highlights?
Yes, Tharindu. So overall, as I said, since we all know we are paying about 71% of our revenue as interest payments, there's very limited that is left over even to boost off or recurrent expenditure or anything.
Are you saying that Santa Claus is not kind to us this Christmas?
Exactly, Santa Claus is not kind to us this Christmas. So, but in terms of regulatory side, there could have been things done to ease the business pressure. So on that front, actually, Finance Minister has proposed to waive off the business registration fee for startups, which I think is a good one. But I think the important thing could have been.
But wasn't that removed even earlier? Didn't they talk about that?
They spoke about it, but he has pronounced it again. But okay. I think that the ideal solution could have been minimizing the number of steps for the registration.
Absolutely.
Because I think people were not reluctant about the fee. They were reluctant. They had the concerns about the tedious process.
The bureaucracy.
Bureaucracy. They have to wait now. For even I have engaged in one business registration for 3 months. I still haven't got the registration. So I think that's the problem. It's not about the payment. It's basically the process. So that has been announced. But as industries, he has spoken about organic fertilizer. Some on the agricultural side, some on the sports, steel, and also accessory manufacturing for apparel sector. Those have been pronounced. But as on the overall economy, generally, rather than trying to boost certain sectors, when you keep a level playing field, I think that is the best option for the certain sectors to take off. Because when you are having a level playing field, the resource allocation happens in a balanced manner. Because if you try to do some additional boosting, sometimes it's crowding out, or there are some necessary resources artificially being channeled to another sector, which affects the other sectors.
Correct.
So right, while you are thinking, okay, these sectors may boost, actually you are boosting these sectors
at the expense of the other.
Exactly, at the expense of the other. So I think to avoid that, the original strategy has to be you keep a level playing field. So in this budget, summarizing the answer, the business registration has been simplified. Other than that, the dairy, agriculture, sports equipment, fabric accessories, those have been discussed, providing some additional support.
Yes.
And some on the pharmaceutical side with some other foreign investments have been talked by the BOI. So that's the overall
Have
summary.
they said what exact benefits they are going to provide to those sectors? Or
It was not very clear when I read the budget speech.
Yeah.
But there are
and that's a common problem.
That's a
Dhananath.
common
It's
exactly.
not very clear. I mean, I thought a budget is supposed to be specific.
Exactly. So that's most of the time finance minister just say I allocate 10 billion rupees, 15 billion rupees for this. So how the allocation is going to impact and what the strategy is generally the missing link in these proposals. Tharindu.
Dhananath, in terms of the sectors being hit with more taxes, what are the concerns that you have?
Yes, basically mainly the banking sector and the financial services, the VAT has been increased from 15% to 18%. So that sector will have an impact obviously. However, the finance minister said that the cost cannot be passed towards the customer, but generally in economics we all know how it happens is it will be definitely charged from the customer.
Directly or indirectly?
Directly or indirectly. And I think the bigger concern for me was on the surcharge on the companies earning more than 2 billion rupees.
Yeah, the super gains profit.
The super gain profits. Because I think in 2015, the then finance minister again imposed a similar tax. But if I am not mistaken, there is a court case pending for that.
Okay.
And because because now the dividends have been declared, accounts have been finalized, and when you go back and ask for them to pay another 25% surcharge, that's kind of unfair.
Correct.
And also the business community may think like every 5 years now it seems like without having a consistent strategy, now the government's coming and say every 5 years regardless of which the colors that they hold,
Yeah.
they come and impose another 25%.
And Dhananath, are we not sending the wrong signal by doing this? Because for a company to get a super gain, that means they've developed a proper strategy, they've got the people going on, and the fact that they've made a profit clearly shows that they've done their economic activities right. And instead of recognizing them, supporting them, and encouraging that to happen, this is more like being punished. This is more like the first of the class being told, look, you are doing way better than the others, not good, we are punishing you. Am I wrong to think like that?
No, the signaling is similar to exactly what you thought, Tharindu. That was where I started. The expenditure could have been cut down further because now we are punishing the good kid who is doing so well in the class, and now they are because all these companies are all generally have a regional presence.
Correct.
So when this happens, most likely they will also try to
Scale back the operations
scale
here.
back the operation, and they will try to park the orders on in other countries. And I think that's why I said the starting point could have been cutting down the expenditure. Of course, the finance minister has attempted to do that. His explanation was, I have to somehow collect the money from the people who have the money. So I think that was his thinking line, but I think it definitely provides a wrong signal for the big businesses because they are being penalized for the inconsistent and wrong policies that we have been adopting. But I think the better place to start was like the state-owned enterprises. Finance minister mentioned about it, like some of the privatizations, some of the downscaling of some of the unnecessary state-owned enterprises. He mentioned about having a 300 list of state-owned enterprises, but my organization is studying the state-owned enterprises businesses. We have a list of about 527. But depending on which definition he uses,
correct.
Because today also we saw the government is trying to open a new subsidiary under Ceylon Petroleum Corporation for gas exploration. So this is how the SOEs becomes more, there are more SOEs created under the company registrar without understanding the gravity of it.
So Dhananath, we are going to come back into more details on that.
Yes.
Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break. This is BISNOMICS. Welcome back to BISNOMICS, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. We are in conversation with Dhananath Fernando regarding the recent budget proposals of the government of Sri Lanka. Dhananath, as we were discussing before the break, the addition of more SOEs, do you think that this is one of the factors plaguing the budget deficit that we face?
Absolutely, Tharindu. Now, if you look at the losses of the state-owned enterprises, which is colossal losses for non-value adding public services. I think this example has been discussed so many times. basically the Sri Lankan Airlines, which lost about 44 billion rupees per annum, which is about 99 million per day. Of course, the poor people won't get benefit out of it. It's a non. I mean, there are so many airlines coming and taking on and taking off from Sri Lanka. So I don't think it's as a necessary service. At the same time, we are our expenditure on Samurdhi, which is like our safety net program,
Correct.
is about 72 billion rupees. So of course, almost half of the Samurdhi budget we are losing just on one state-owned enterprise. And on the Samurdhi budget also about 25% is administrative cost. So having because all the Samurdhi beneficiaries, they have a bank account details, they have the Samurdhi account. I think it's easy that we do a digital transfer rather than having a massive infrastructure cost of 25% of the total allocation for.
But that can also then be allocated.
Exactly, that can also be allocated for the Samurdhi beneficiaries.
Correct.
And also the state-owned enterprises losses. So that is the main problem. I think there are so many state-owned enterprises, about 520 is completely beyond our capacity, Taridu. For a 20 million country, you really do. We have a corporation for cashew, we have for this, that, everything. We have
the entities are there, but there is no work, proper work happening.
Exactly, entities are there, there's no proper work, and the money is being wasted. They occupy very valuable land in Colombo. So if you really look at the asset base and calculate it, it really doesn't make sense. And the other argument is there are some state operations which are profit making, but the point, Tarindu, is it is not worth the assets that they utilize. Now you can have like a 10-acre land and you can make 10 rupees of profit, but just because of making a 10 rupees of profit doesn't mean that you are doing well, because your asset base is about 10 acres in Colombo.
Correct.
So it is not the asset or the profits and losses that we have to consider, but what is the profits that they are generating based on the asset base. So if you compare our state-owned enterprises on the based on the assets that they utilize, it really doesn't make sense. Our state profit-making state enterprises are the banks. So basically, we know on the banking sector, most of the government funding has been channeled through those banks. Government salaries are being channeled through those banks. Import, export, most of the time the government, what they do is channeled through their banks.
The government banks.
Government banks, the EPF, ETF, everything is managed through those state banks. So they are not making a profit because of the efficiency, it is just because of the state association. So even the profit making, we are happy that at least those banks are making a profit. If they are also making losses, that would be a bigger problem.
Banks running out of cash, another financial crisis, the last thing we need.
Exactly. So but but how we have to see the problem is we have to look at on the efficiency terms to really overcome this problem.
Dhananath, very insightful thoughts indeed. Any other new taxes that has been proposed? We did see about this, the one-off tax for the companies that have those massive numbers, but any other new taxes that has been brought in by this time's budget?
Basically this, as I mentioned, the financial services tax has been increased, and also another about I think 2.5% tax has been imposed for the companies which generates about 120 million rupees per annum. Which is pretty much like an NBT which was there earlier. So that tax has been imposed, and at the same time I think the taxes on consumption, things like alcohol, basically you call the sin taxes, have been again increased. So that's the overall tax base, and also on vehicle, sometimes the vehicle, the alterations, there has been new taxes added. That has been the main revenue channels that has been pronounced in this budget, Taridu.
And we even saw some tax regarding accidents, that if you meet with an accident.
Yes. So basically, yes, I don't know how practical it is.
Exactly.
But because basically the purpose of insurance was to provide relief for for both parties.
Yeah.
When you meet with an accident, I think that's a system, that's a valuable value of the market system.
Correct.
Even if you meet with an accident, you have peace of mind, which is the most important thing, that I need not to incur additional cost because I have been paying my premium, my repair and everything has been taken care of. Even if there's a loss of life, that been taken care of. So now trying to tax it additionally, I am not sure how people will perceive that. And in terms of administration, most likely that will be charged on the customer account, because the insurance company will definitely pass it on to the customer. So, not sure how people will perceive that, basically whether we will be able to reduce the number of accidents by having that sort of a policy, because the insurance, just because you have an insurance, people are not trying to do like an accident purposely,
Deliberately, yes.
deliberately. So I think that is something that we have to rethink. But however, also we have to understand the desperation of the finance minister to raise revenue.
Yes.
But
So that means maybe a part of the money paid by the insurance now goes to the government.
exactly. So
And this tax, the financial services tax, is there a tax for the banks and all that?
not a tax, but they have increased the VAT from 15% to 18%.
Okay. I want to raise a question with you, and I always ask this from economists such as yourself, whom I meet. Now, in Sri Lanka, we see banks are performing extremely well. Now, the banks, now some people say, well, that's a problem. If the party that is supposed to mediate the monetary transactions is making money, that means the other two parties are losing out. But the banks are saying, look, we are making money because our customers are making money. Dhananath, where do you see the balance in this equilibrium?
Yes, so the banks, Tarindu, basically in terms of this financial sector, one is their asset base. If you compare, they are making a lot of profits. But I think for the last few years, these numbers we have to reevaluate after the moratorium period is over.
Correct.
Because now most of the banks are under
Still on a moratorium.
Still on a moratorium.
Yes, till 31st December, I believe they have extended.
Yes.
So we don't know what the bad loan percentage is.
Exactly. We don't know really what is the NPL percentage on one side. And at the same time, on the bank side, Tarindu, why they keep like a higher margin is because of the difficulties in the recovery process. Now our judiciary system is a problem, and even on credit cards or anything, if someone defaults, recovering that money is a very difficult process. As a result, of course, we see there's microfinancing and so many other industries has come up. But I think the reason is we have to really compare it with the asset base. Of course, our interest rates are also high compared. I mean, of course, now the interest rates has to go up because of the the monetary policy that we have applied for the last few years. But other than that, I'm not sure whether actually the parties are losing it out, because you have to compare it with the asset base and also with the economic condition. But I think banking sector is quite a competitive sector because there are international players, there are local banks, there are state banks. So I don't think that anyone can charge a super profit or like a super profit by sort of a rent seeking activity, because it's kind of a competitive market.
For sure.
Yes. So that's my overall thought. I think it's the regulatory processes and the difficulties in recoveries are what is leading on the banking sector.
Dhananath, any budget proposals or any proposals in this time's budget that you saw that can actually encourage further investments into Sri Lanka?
Taridu, again, it was pronounced that some of the lands are going to basically utilize the underperforming assets or underutilized assets was pronounced. But I think as a business person, investors won't basically look at, rather than like the tax concessions or anything, they look at the ability to make profits.
Correct.
When
not on promises, not on empty promises.
Exactly, because if I can make a profit, I pay a tax thereafter. And rather than promising me so many things, if I have a clear-cut process where I can get things done on the legal method without interference of anyone, that is what I expect. I don't want like special attention like a private assistant to get all the things done, because I will be comfortable by going through the official channel, getting things done as long as the process is simple. I think if we can ensure that, the investors will start coming in. But now the problem is, I think our processes have been too much complicated. Even the BOI have that problem. We talked about a single window. Even in this budget, the finance minister pronounced about a single window. All those are good ideas, but as long as we don't implement it, this single window discussion is about like, I think 5-6 years old. I think even more than that. Even the previous government, they talked about a single window. But single window really has to translate to saving time as an investor. So I think doing that is the important thing. I think that's what Port City serves for. They have cut down a lot of red tape. It's like there's a commission, they make the decisions. I think if you can bring that regulatory regime to the entire country, what is in Port City, I am sure we will be able to see more investments in Sri Lanka.
I like how simple and pragmatic you are in your explanations, making it very clear to all of us as to what's really going on. Now, if you look at percentage-wise allocations from the budget for health and education, and Dhananath, we all know in some of the Asian countries, Singapore, they allocate very heavy percentages for health, for improving education. And this has been debated earlier as well, asking for the government to allocate more resources for health and education. Do we see any significant increase in the allocations for health and education from this time's budget?
Not a significant increase, Thanindu. So we have shared about 6% for health and about I think 4% for education. Not a significant jump, and also 12% for defense. So it's not a basically on health and education. It's not a jump basically. It's
and is this not an ailing problem for our economy?
Definitely, it's an ailing problem. So this again stems down to our unnecessary expenditure, because now I think the role of the state could have been providing the public goods which the individuals cannot really provide. So the judiciary system, education, that can be definitely provided by private sector, but even for poor people, or like there can be a public education and a healthcare system. And even Tharindu, healthcare, we all know our public healthcare is not the best. It's at a certain level, but definitely we know how many people in a queue to get a stent done, how many people in the government hospital in a queue to get an open heart surgery done. I think the queue is about 2 years, 3 years long. So it is, so when you need to do open heart surgery, when you have to wait for 3 years in a queue,
by the time it's your time, you're gone.
Exactly, it doesn't really reflect the need, so it's not the best. It's not the best, but at least we have to be happy. At least there's something.
There's something.
There's
yes.
something. But I think the problem is again, it's not adequate. But I think it's not adequate basically because of we are spending so much of money on a lot of unnecessary things. So of course the budget could have been, you could have easily allocated 99 million rupees if we cut down Sri Lankan per day, 99 million rupees per day for healthcare or education if we cut down Sri Lankan. So likewise, I think that.
And Dhananath, correct me if I'm wrong, but around the world there have been so many countries that tried to have their own airline, and then later they shut it down because it didn't make economic sense. Doesn't mean that there is no connectivity to those countries. It's just that they made a decision based on the fact that it didn't make economic sense.
Exactly. I think the best example is the Air India case, which was done very recently. It was again sold back to the Tata, who was the founder of the Indian airline. So I think that is that definitely. So when it's not making profits, and also we have to pick our battles, Tharindu. We are in a very difficult economic situation. You can't do every business under the sun, and even a private business is finding it difficult to do all the businesses under the sun. So they are expanding. They are making very cautious decisions.
Even the largest conglomerate has its limits.
Exactly, and they are making very sensible financial decisions. They do research, they do all sorts of things, and then only they expand slowly. But now if you look at our government, they are in all sectors. They are in hotel industry, they are in hospitality, they are in hospitals, they are all over. They are in financial services.
States.
They are in states, they are everything. They are in airlines, public transportation. There are so many areas. So
and do you think that because they are into so many things, they can't properly overlook and control, as a result, you end up with a lot of corruption?
Exactly. When you try to grip all, you lose all. I think that's what exactly.
Try to hug everything and there's things dropping out.
Exactly. And also, Tharindu, as a businessman, when you risk your money, you have a motivation to recover that. It could be your money, your credibility, anything. But when you give someone else's money, you really don't have a motivation.
Everyone thinks they can be a Branson.
Exactly. And then even, I mean, I am happy if they can think they can be a Branson, but at least then people try to, okay, this is not our money, they try to earn from that money.
True, which is a sad state.
Exactly. And that's what that has happened. And when you have a large state sector, of course, you really can't track what is happening. I think that's exactly what happened when Finance Minister said he has 300 SOEs, but I know there's about 527. I'm not talking about these government ministries. Yes. I'm talking about state-owned enterprises, various statutory bodies, corporations and all that.
So, none of you are going to continue this discussion. Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break. This is BISNOMICS. Welcome back to BISNOMICS, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. We are in conversation with Dhananath Fernando regarding the recent developments of the budget presented by the government of Sri Lanka. Dhananath, now I also have a different question now, not regarding the exact budget per se, but what happens now? Because we see these budget proposals coming in, and then once a budget has passed, what are the next steps usually involved before they become action? Because sometimes we see this term and we see the situation where people say, okay, this was said in the budget, but we don't really see that in the market. So what's the ideal sequence of steps?
So basically, the finance ministry and the speaker has to sign for certain regulations. Then it becomes enacted or active. So as you very correctly said, Tarindu, most of these, I think there's Verity Research has done a budget tracking. So according to them, even when the then finance minister Honorable Mangala Samaraveera was the finance minister, only about I think 40 to 50% has been implemented. And from the of the year that there was not a budget, when there was no budget presented in 2020, then they have evaluated about 34 cabinet decisions. Only I think 4% have been implemented.
Wow.
So it is. So I think there's a unnecessary also media hype around the budget.
Correct.
Where there is a lot of being happened, but implementation wise, even they can't track what are the budget proposals that been implemented or not, and most of the time this information is not available. So ideally the process is, once it's done, it becomes when it's approved by the parliament with the final voting, it becomes the basically people have it means that the people have provided the consent to do these expenditure and raise these revenue, and right. Then the finance minister and the respective ministries can implement that.
Because Dhananath, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's nothing stopping the government from proposing one thing in the budget, even enacting it, but then a month or two later going back on it, isn't it?
Exactly. They can have. However,
but back in the day, when you present a budget, usually it sticks for quite some time.
Exactly. So actually, finance minister this time had said on the expenditure front that no supplementary allocations can be done for the next coming months.
Probably because there's no money to allocate.
Yes, exactly. Probably there's no money, but I think that's a positive,
Absolutely,
positive
we need
indication.
to control our costs.
Exactly. But of course, as you very correctly said, there have been so many instances where one thing has been pronounced in the budget across all governments, and completely they go with a complete different direction. And at the same time, there are in the budget, there's another category, there's no mention about on that particular policy in the budget, but all of a sudden that being presented in parliament, and all of a sudden that expenditure comes up. And also there's areas in the budget where there could have been things that should have been in the budget, but it never sees the light, even throughout that.
I think I'm going to come back to you on that in more detail. Continuous refusal of the IMF support and restructuring our debt. Are we not digging our own economic grave by doing this?
Tarindu, so the budget also has to be seen with the central bank roadmap that they released on 1st of October.
Yes, do enlighten us on that.
Yes, so basically the central bank basically mentioned a couple of steps, and they, in particular the governor said, no, we are not going to the IMF program. Right. So I think because of that, the finance minister also didn't mention anything about the IMF. I think how the government sees is, we have been to the IMF for 16 times. But there's no significant economic improvement is the way that the policymakers seeing at the moment.
That means we've obtained support from the IMF 16 times.
Yes, we obtained support from the IMF for 16 times.
Dhananath, once again, I mean, like I say, I always, when I have a very intellectual guest in front of me, I always put myself as, I would say, a layman, and I ask questions just to make sure that everybody in the country understands this. But if I come to you and take money, and then if I am saying, look, I came to you 16 times and I took money from you, but I didn't get any benefit from that, it's not really your fault, isn't it? It's really my fault. I don't know how to use the money I'm getting.
No, exactly. That's why I say how the government sees is, okay, you went for 16 times, nothing happened. So I think my argument is, of course, nothing happened because we didn't do it properly. Exactly your argument. And we have seen, actually, Advocata had done a report, Dr. Roshan spoke about in the same forum.
Of whom we had the pleasure of having in our show.
Exactly. So what we see is, we haven't really continued the IMF program on one side. And also IMF's role is, Tarindu, not to prosper our economy. You know, if we have a serious disease, heart disease, we go to the doctor and he will recommend us to do a open heart surgery or whatever the medical repercussions. I am not expecting the doctor to make me a good athlete, right? I go to the doctor to solve my disease. So we are going to the IMF to solve the problem, and thereafter, if I am an athlete, I have to go to my coach to get the rest of the stuff done. So once,
And after all, IMF was created in its history to prevent people fixing the exchange rates, isn't it?
exactly. So I think the IMF solution has to be looked in that light. But having said that, Tarendu, I don't think IMF has a magic solution to solve this problem. Anyway, that bitter medication has to be taken by us. Doctor can recommend, prescribe the medicine. Ultimately, I have to swallow the pill. So if I don't swallow the pill, I am expecting just because I went to the doctor I'll have,
and then blaming the doctor.
Doctor is not the right way to do that. I have to go through the surgery. I have to swallow the pill. I have to take that beta medicine. If I do that only, I will recover. Now going to IMF again, it's just to recover. We have a crisis. But however, we have to do that hard. We have to get to that hard reforms and get those reforms done. That's the important thing. So in this budget, finance minister didn't mention about IMF. The only thing that IMF could bring, in my view, is the credibility, Tarendu. It assures that we will have some financial control, because now, and also the IMF money is going to the central bank, not to the treasury. So there is a control over there. That's the uniqueness of the IMF program. But having said that,
just a question there. If you take countries like UK, you see sometimes very independent parties being appointed, and at one time there was, I believe, even a national of Canadian origin who was heading the UK central bank.
Yes.
Whereas in Sri Lanka, we all know, Dhananath, that the central bank governor's appointment is usually someone who is closely politically associated most of the time.
Exactly.
Someone of whom the government can have control.
Exactly. So I think that is another problem. I think the mandate of the central bank is to be independent, but unfortunately now the political powers have been also somewhat invading that independency, diluting that independency. That's quite worrying. But however, at least there's some level of control still at the central bank. So I think that's how the IMF program works. But I think the important thing is the government should show the commitment that we are ready to do reforms, and IMF will bring that credibility and the technical expertise. I think now where it is, the IMF, because from the IMF borrowing, we will not be able to settle our creditors, Tarendu. We have to pay about 4 billion rupees for next 4 to 5 years every year. That is, as I have given this example before, from the Hambantota port deal, we could only make about 1.3 billion. So we are talking about almost about 4 to 5 times every year for the next 4 years.
You're talking in dollar terms here.
In dollar terms, right? So it's like about 16 times of the Hambantota port deal, which is very difficult when you look at the numbers.
Especially with our tourism still being in doldrums.
Exactly. So then IMF will only bring the credibility. With the IMF, where you can go to bilateral partners, you can go to sometimes the financial markets and say, look,
these guys are trusting us.
These guys are trusting us. We are on a program. Our books are being accounted. They are monitoring our books. We are good for money. So then something can be done. But I think now the situation is IMF don't want to bail out any creditors.
Yeah.
So then we have to go and restructure the debt, which would be a very painful process. Greece had gone through that, and Argentina had gone through that.
And usually these are government changing initiatives.
Exactly.
Governments do end up
and
getting
regardless
toppled.
of, it's not only the government, the entire country is going for a very difficult time, because even if there's a new political party coming in, they also have to do the hard reforms.
Correct.
So anyway, the hard reforms are bitter, it's painful, people don't like it, and even if you don't do the reform, still people will be painful.
Correct.
So it's a very it's a very bitter choice.
Live with the pain or go through the hard surgery and have some hope of recovery.
Exactly.
Dhananath, on a final note, as an economist, what are the budget proposals that you would have liked to see this time but you are not seeing it? Quickly, if you could enlighten us.
Yes, Tarendu. I think the first part of the budget speech could have been a policy statement rather than I am saying budget proposals, because everyone knows we are in a very difficult situation. So if the finance minister could have provided like a policy direction in the first part, saying this is a problem, and indeed, in fact, he did it when he presented the tax amnesty bill. he actually used a poem in Sinhala literature, saying "Marana thunak ඇති මිනිසෙක් පැණි කෑ" කියලා. We have very limited space to get anything done. So he mentioned that. So I think if he had provided a policy direction in the first place, saying we are looking at a market option, we are looking to embrace markets, we are going to embrace the market system and having that cost and allowing the demand and supply to work, and price being used as the temperature meter, thermometer, and that if that policy direction was done, and also I think he could have announced like some of the state reforms that he is planning to do, rather than just announcing it as like, okay, we are going to reform it, maybe few of those hard reforms if he could list it out, I think then the investors could have taken it a little bit more seriously than this. That is, I think, could have been, is a big missing part. But I must say, in a difficult time, this budget is not a bad budget. But the problem is, given the context, it doesn't address the key issues. Our debt problem, our dollar crisis, our people are waiting in long queues because they can't have their imports, LP gas and all that. And our exporters are in a big trouble, that there's a fixed exchange rate. It's difficult because they already know the market rate is about 235.40, but they are being only offered at 203. So and they can't import, the LCs cannot be opened, that the goods cannot be cleared at ports. So everyone is in bit of a hard period. So those bigger questions could have been addressed in the first part as a policy direction, in my view. So then they know, okay, even if it's a difficult, as I said, even if it's a difficult reform, he could have easily pronounced, not easily, but it's difficult, but to at least if the roadmap was given, then people can get themselves prepared. Okay, correct. Now there's a problem, we are going to cut down our investment, we are not expanding, let's somehow go through this. So then I think the signaling could have been much better. And also there are some contradicting messaging as well, Tarindu, finally, because finance minister wants to cut down the state expenditure. At the same time, he is planning to recruit another 50,000 odd graduates to the state sector. So those provides mixing and contradicting signals. Correct. So that could have been my suggestions to incorporate in the budget.
Dhananath Fernando, thank you very much for joining us. You are indeed a voice that people look forward to listening to, especially on economic related matters. It was an absolute pleasure having you with us despite your busy schedule. Wish you good luck, and we only hope that the relevant authorities will listen to the young, bright talent of this country such as yourself and take the necessary decisions sooner rather than later. Take the hard decisions now so that we reap the sweeter rewards in the future. Thank you so much for joining us, and best of luck.
Thank you, Dadu. Thank you very much for having me.
We hope this discussion of the Sri Lankan budget would help you in your business decision making and even when planning your personal investments. I'm Thananath Fernando, and I will see you with the next episode. This is BISNOMICS.